Wow, what a race. What a start to the season. What did you make of the Australian Grand Prix? I've got to say, I think it's one of the best, if not the best, season opener that I've ever seen in Formula One. It had everything: rain, safety cars, crashes, spins, battles, overtakes, and to top it off, it also had a battle for the victory that went right down to the wire onto the final lap. It really was a race to remember, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it does set the tone for what we hope will be an amazing season. Given how eventful the Grand Prix was, there are plenty of stories that have come away from the first race of 2025. First of all, Lando's stellar drive. I really thought that Lando really showed just how much progress he's made over the winter break. I think it really was a mature drive from someone who clearly, I think this time last year, had that race been run, same conditions, same scenario, he wouldn't have won that race. It just goes to show what a winter break can do. Lando really does look as though he's in better shape than ever. And then there was Verstappen showing that even when he doesn't have the best car, even when his back is against the wall, you cannot write him off. He will be right there. And you can bet that this won't be just a one-off. This will be an ongoing theme across the season where he will be able to fight at the front of the grid, regardless of whether he's got the best car or not. Also, Alex Albon had a great start to the season, showing that Williams has made huge strides compared to 2024, and that he will not just be cast aside by his new teammate Carlos Sainz. We also have to give a mention to Kimi Antonelli. What a fantastic debut that was, P16 to P4. What a drive. He really was flawless apart from that spin at turn 4, but nevertheless, it was a brilliant drive from him. And then finally, Ferrari, who, given how disappointing that result was for them in Australia, they really do have a lot of work to do. But I want to talk about a driver who will be walking away from Melbourne thinking about what might have been. Because at one point, it looked as though they could actually have won the race. But in just one corner, their hopes drained away with the rain. And of course, I am talking about Oscar Piastri, the man who had the whole of Melbourne, the whole of Australia in his corner, cheering him on as he pushed Norris hard for the race lead, and at certain points actually looked the fastest driver on track. Unlike the handful of rookies like Hadjar and Doohan and seasoned veterans like Alonso and Sainz, Piastri actually kept his car on the black stuff in the tough conditions and was actually running well. He was running in the podium places for a lot of the Grand Prix. And I'm sure you're aware of the well-known stat that Australia has never had one of its own drivers finish their home race on the podium. And Formula One has been racing in Australia for 40 years now. In fact, the first race was held in 1985 in Adelaide. But in that time, 6 drivers have tried and failed to finish their home race on the rostrum. I'll put a list of the drivers on screen for you. And it's become known as the Australian Grand Prix curse. Time and time again, the Aussie drivers just cannot seem to break it for whatever reason. They've been close before, but there always just seems to be something that's standing in their way. You only have to look at the most recent Aussie drivers to have raced in Formula One, and that will paint the picture for you. Let's start with Mark Webber, who raced in Formula One from 2002 to 2013, and he raced at his home Grand Prix 12 times. And in that time, he never managed to finish on the podium, with a best finish of 4th coming in the 2012 race, which I find quite amazing. But this was the only time that Webber managed to better the 5th place that he scored on his F1 debut for Minardi in 2002, again in Melbourne, which is surprising considering the amount of quick machinery that he had, particularly in his Red Bull days. Webber did lead twice at Albert Park in both 2006 and 2010, and he also qualified on the front row twice as well. But it always seemed to just be a combination of factors that always prevented him from standing on the podium at his home race. Then there was Daniel Ricciardo, who, like Webber, never really seemed to have luck on his side when he was racing in front of his home crowd, even when he had a car that was clearly capable of finishing on the podium. But at least Ricciardo did get a taster of what it was like to finish on the podium at his home race, when he did so in 2014 on his Red Bull debut. But the achievement would be short-lived because Ricciardo was disqualified just hours after the Grand Prix for a fuel irregularity. How cruel can you get? He would never manage to repeat this performance ever again, finishing a best of 4th twice in 2016 and 2018, but he never quite managed to make it a reality. And that brings us nicely onto Piastri himself, who in his previous 2 appearances in Melbourne has finished in the points. He finished 8th in 2023 and then finished 4th last year in 2024. So qualifying on the front row gave him a real chance of getting the job done, especially as he'd be driving what looks to be the fastest car on the grid this year. So let's break down Piastri's race in a little more detail. At the start, he made a reasonable getaway. He defended well from Verstappen and followed Norris out of the corner, but it was on the exit as to where he lost out to Verstappen, because Verstappen managed to find a little extra grip, a little extra traction on the exit of the corner and went around the outside of Oscar and took the position. From then on, it really was a three-horse race because Norris, Verstappen and Piastri were completely in a league of their own. They were faster than everyone else, even if McLaren, I think, had the slight advantage over Max. If you look at how McLaren began to look a little bit quicker as the battle raged on. It was then on lap 17 when Oscar was in the DRS range of Max and managed to force him into a mistake, a surprising mistake, because Max does make too many mistakes in these type of conditions, but he locked his left front, ran wide at turn 13, and Oscar scythed through into second place. And from then on, he began to slowly reel in his teammate Norris and was actually looking the quickest driver on track. And that's when, around the midway point of the race, McLaren surprisingly decided to intervene and told Oscar to hold station, which I kind of thought was quite an interesting call. Even when the safety car came out and both of the drivers pitted for dry tyres, McLaren still looked the quickest car on track and had the slight edge over Max, who was still behind in third place. But then that brief rain shower hit and both Norris and Piastri were completely caught out as they slid off the track at turn 14, going through the gravel. And while Norris somehow managed to regain control of his car and rejoin the circuit, Piastri was not so fortunate, as when he came back onto the track he lost the rear of the car and spun onto the wet grass, and it looked as though he'd managed to beach his car and wouldn't be able to move it. Just at that point in the race where a podium really did look a possibility for Oscar, that dreaded curse struck once again. It looked as though his race was going to be over there and then because he just couldn't get any traction on the wet grass, but thanks to lessons from, of all people, Jeremy Clarkson, he managed to reverse it back onto the runoff, rejoin the race, albeit out of the points. Credit to him, he did manage to recover back into the points and finish P9 between both Ferraris, but you've got to say that this was such a missed opportunity for Oscar. You know, the podium was there in his grasp, and it was such a shame given just how well he'd run earlier on. And what a moment it would have been, especially as because he's obviously a Melbourne local, he lived and grew up just 10 minutes away from the circuit. To be fair to him, after the race he was quick to hold his hands up and admit that he had made a mistake. But to be honest, looking back at it, I think he was quite unlucky, frankly, and he deserved the podium at the very least, given how well he'd driven. So like his fellow Aussies, Piastri has become a victim of the dreaded Australian Grand Prix curse. But I think that if anyone is to break it in the future, I think it will be him. Well, one, he's obviously a fantastic driver, and I think, personally, he will be a world champion in the future. And two, given that he's recently re-signed with McLaren, he's bound to get his hands on some more front-running cars in the next few years. So I think it will only just be a matter of time before Oscar is standing on the podium spraying the bubbly at his home Grand Prix. So there you go guys, that's it for today's video. Feel free to leave your comments below, and as always, please do like the video and do subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.